Hi everyone, my name is Oliver and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. In the spring of 2016, in the quiet town of Fort Worth located in the state of Texas, there was a brutal and cynical murder that shocked even the most experienced investigators. The victim of the crime was a young mother of many children named Elizabeth Paula Arellano, who worked as a paramedic, and you will be shocked to learn who was her executioner. The circumstances of the tragedy were so strange that at first, the police even put forward the theory that Elizabeth may have voluntarily passed away. However, such a theory did not fit with the testimony of people who became accidental witnesses of the terrible scene. The investigation had to do a lot of hard work to understand everything and send the criminal to the dock. However, given the brutality of the crime he committed, the sentence handed down seemed too lenient and unfair to many. Elizabeth Paula Arellano was born on August 16, 1987, in the American city of Fort Worth, Texas, where she was destined to live all her short life. She grew up with her two sisters, Alessandra and Giovanna, with whom she was always practically inseparable. Elizabeth's birth father left the family when she was very young. He showed no interest in the fate of his daughter and did not contact her in any way. Soon, her mother Juanita remarried to a man named Fidel, who adopted her children and treated them as his own. Elizabeth had a very warm relationship with her stepfather, who supported and helped her in everything. The girl studied diligently at school and dreamed of one day becoming a doctor. In high school, she met a guy named Rudolph Arellano, with whom she soon had a romantic relationship. The young man was almost 8 years older than her, which somewhat embarrassed Elizabeth's parents, but they did not interfere with their romance because the chosen daughter seemed to them a man serious and quite reliable. At the age of 16 years, barely out of school, Elizabeth married her lover legally. The couple, one after another, had 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter. But despite the appearance of numerous heirs, Elizabeth did not intend to become a housewife. She remembered her childhood dream, so Elizabeth graduated from medical school and got a job as a paramedic, planning to get a higher education to become a doctor. The young woman was kind and pious, brought up in Christian traditions. She regularly took her children to church, instilling in them love and compassion for their neighbors. Family and friends characterized her as a very responsive person, always ready to help. From the outside, their marriage with Rudolph seemed strong and happy, but after 13 years of living together, this union began to literally crack at the seams. Rudolph had been jealous of his young wife before, trying to control her in everything, but over time, his behavior became simply unbearable. In the spring of 2016, Elizabeth, after another jealousy scene organized by her husband, took the children and moved to the house of her parents. Rudolph made an attempt to reconcile with his wife, but the young woman was tired of tolerating his fits of anger. In addition, she did not want the children almost every day to listen to the parents' scandals. So she gathered her courage and officially filed for divorce. A few days after Elizabeth took the children and filed for divorce, she mysteriously disappeared. According to friends and family, she was in good spirits and in order to distract herself from family problems and a little divorce, decided after work to go with colleagues to a local club. So, on Friday evening, April 15, 2016, the 28-year-old young mother, in the company of her friends, went to a fun place. There she danced and had a good time but did not touch alcohol because she planned to get home in her own car, on which she arrived at the club. Elizabeth returned home well past midnight on April 16th. Having parked the car, she called her friend with whom she had vacationed at the club that night and told her that she had already reached home and that she was all right. Elizabeth then hung up the phone but never entered the house. The next morning, her mother Juanita was very worried when she found her daughter was not home. She knew that Elizabeth was planning to spend the evening with friends, but her daughter should have returned long ago. She couldn't leave somewhere unannounced, and besides, her car was parked outside the house, which meant that Elizabeth had returned from the club. When Juanita approached the car, it turned out that it was not locked. The key was still sticking in the ignition, and inside on the seat were her daughter's purse and cell phone. Naturally, she couldn't leave her personal belongings in the open car like that, which meant that something terrible had happened. The woman immediately called the police, reporting a missing person. The police believed that they would be able to solve the case, as they call it, on hot tracks. In addition, there was still hope that Elizabeth was alive because there was no blood or signs of struggle in the car. But it wasn't that simple. The first thing was to reconstruct in the smallest detail the chronology of the events of that evening and night to trace Elizabeth's entire route, to find and question all possible witnesses. First, friends and colleagues of the young woman with whom she had spent the evening before her disappearance were interviewed. They gave the exact time when she went home, and later Elizabeth herself called back, saying that she had reached the place safely. In addition, several calls and messages from her ex-husband Rudolph Arellano, who had persistently tried to contact her that night, were found in the missing person's cell phone. But Elizabeth never answered him. Police officers went to Rudolph's house to find out where he was and what he was doing the previous evening and night. According to the man, he had been in contact with his ex-spouse just the night before, and she had promised that she would bring the children to him for the weekend. But afterward, she stopped answering the phone, and he thought she had changed her mind. As for an alibi, Arellano's alibi was questionable. According to him, he sat with a friend at a local bar that evening, and around midnight, he returned to his home and went to bed. His friend and several other people who had been relaxing at the same establishment on Friday confirmed that Rudolph was indeed there. But where he went afterward, no one could say for sure. The man assured that he had gone home, but as he now lived alone, there was no one to confirm this. Thus, the police were not going to exclude Mr. Arellano from the list of suspects. Besides, he didn't seem upset or worried. It was clear that he and Elizabeth were in the process of divorce, but they had been married for many years. She was the mother of his children, and it was strange that her disappearance had not affected him in any way. On the night of the disappearance of a young mother, a fisherman called the emergency services to report a strange incident he had witnessed. The man said that he was sitting alone with a fishing rod on a bridge, which is part of an interstate highway, when about 4:30 o'clock in the morning, he noticed a car drive onto the bridge, stop, and then the driver pulled out something large that looked like a person and threw it into the water. It also appeared to him that something bulky and obviously heavy was tied to this person. Since the fisherman was at a great distance, and it was still dark, he could not see details, nor could he see the make and number of the car. In addition, there was a strong wind on the bridge, so the man could not hear anything. Soon, another witness was found walking at night with his dog down by the bridge. He did not see what was happening on the bridge itself, but a heartbreaking scream caught his attention. Then he saw something large flying down from the bridge, followed by a splash, and then silence. Based on the testimony of witnesses, the police decided to examine the bottom of the pond near the bridge. A few hours later, divers came across a body with a massive piece of concrete tied to its neck with a rope. The drowned woman turned out to be the missing Elizabeth Arellano. Had it not been for the testimony of a passerby and a fisherman, her body would probably have been discovered very soon or not found at all, because the tide weight did not allow the body to float. Then a version was put forward that the young woman decided to leave her life voluntarily against the background of problems in the family. But this assumption was untenable because it did not fit with the testimony of a witness who saw how someone threw her into the water, nor with the words of relatives who assured that Elizabeth made great plans for life and would never do this to her children and parents. Elizabeth was still alive when a piece of concrete was tied to her neck and thrown off the bridge. This was evidenced by the forensic medical results, which showed that the young woman had suffocated, and by the testimony of a man who heard her desperate scream as she flew down the bridge. But who and for what reason could have so brutally massacred a mother of many children? Robbery was not considered because none of Elizabeth's belongings were taken. There were suggestions that the killer could have spotted Elizabeth in the club and then followed her home, or someone guarded her at home waiting for her to return. The ex-husband of the deceased continued to insist that he was sleeping at his home on the night of the murder and had nothing to do with the crime. However, the investigators were still in no hurry to exclude Rudolph from the number of suspects because he had no alibi, and his behavior raised more and more questions. At the funeral, the man put on an act. He wept at the coffin of his ex-wife, saying that he would like to be in her place or die with her. According to his sister Elizabeth, she even believed in the sincerity of his words. In addition, Rudolph actively helped in the creation of a charitable foundation to raise funds for the ceremony of farewell to his wife. But after the funeral, when the man was once again called to testify, he already looked and behaved completely differently, as if nothing bad had happened in his life. After a detailed examination of all the CCTV footage from the last route Elizabeth took, it was determined that a car of the same make and color as Rudolph's had driven away from her parents' house around 3 a.m. The neighbor also recalled seeing the car parked on the road near the deceased's house. Moreover, it was established that the car had subsequently driven towards the very bridge from which the woman had been thrown. This circumstance raised many questions, and when the investigation requested Rudolph's cell phone data on the night of the crime, the questions became even more. It turned out that the man made several calls that night, first near Elizabeth's place of work, and then near the home of his mother-in-law and father-in-law. He also sent his ex-wife several messages trying to find out when she would return, but his messages went unanswered. Apparently, he had been following her and eventually decided to wait for her return at Elizabeth's parents' house. The police finally had enough evidence to arrest Rudolph as the prime suspect and bring him to the station for further questioning. One of the key witnesses in the case was Elizabeth and Rudolph's eldest son. When the boy was shown the rope removed from his mother's neck, the son stated that he had seen it earlier in the backyard of his father's house and remembered it well because he had played with it. Moreover, the boy also recognized a piece of concrete that had been lying in their garden shortly before, after the fence had been replaced. Also, small fragments of this concrete were found in the trunk of the car belonging to Rudolph. The investigation found that the man waited for his ex-wife at her parents' home and abducted her before she could enter the house. He forced her into his car, in the trunk of which he had already prepared rope and concrete. Afterward, he drove to the bridge for the massacre, expecting to go unnoticed. Rudolph Arellano was taken into custody 10 days after his ex-wife's body was recovered from the lake. Despite a large amount of evidence and witness testimony proving his guilt, Rudolph denied any involvement in the crime and continued to insist that he was at home that night. Given the brutality of his actions, Rudolph was facing the ultimate penalty of death, and then, on the advice of his lawyer, he decided to confess to everything and cooperate with the investigation to mitigate the sentence. It wasn't until January 2019 that Arellano pleaded guilty in court and detailed how he kidnapped and murdered his ex-wife and the mother of their 4 children. Juanita, who was in the courtroom listening to his story, fainted, and Alessandra and Giovanna called their sister's killer a monster. Rudolph himself, though he admitted his guilt, felt no remorse or pangs of conscience. He spoke differently and coldly about his murder, did not apologize, and did not explain the motive for his terrible act. The court sentenced the murderer to life in prison without parole. Elizabeth's family members, although they considered such a sentence rather mild, noted that they forgive Rudolph because they do not want their hearts to boil with hatred. Her parents and sisters are now responsible for the upbringing of the deceased woman's children. Thanks for watching, guys. That was Oliver with you. Subscribe to the channel. There's a lot of shocking stories ahead. I'll see you guys again.